I am Annie Richards, your Chester Riverkeeper, and I'm thrilled to deliver my 5th State of the Rivers with ShoreRivers. Thank you all for being here tonight. So, before we dive into the science, I just want to say thank you all. So many ShoreRivers members are here tonight who have been with us for so long, even before ShoreRivers, at our legacy organizations of Chester River Association. Thank you all for your continued support, your continued interest in the Chester and the health of our waterways. I want to say thank you to our volunteers, of which so many are here tonight, our swim testers, our SAB watchers, our event supporters, our Marylanders Grow Oysters participants. It's a huge help to our waterways when you're involved, and it all adds up. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And speaking of volunteers, every State of the Rivers, we like to honor a volunteer whose effort and commitment to the job kind of goes above and beyond that year. In the Chester, our Volunteer of the Year Award is named for an incredibly special volunteer, Bob Ingersoll. And yes, I know he's watching right now. And Bob was not just a volunteer for ShoreRivers, he was an ambassador for the vision that we have for clean waterways and for communities to all come together to speak loudly for it. And this year, the Bob Ingersoll Volunteer of the Year Award goes to Bob Zillig from Graysonville, Maryland. Bob is on my Riverkeeper committee, which I spend a lot of time speaking with about local advocacy issues, development planning issues. He's an SAB watcher on Muddy Creek, and he's a community advocate. Best of all, he's been recreating on the Chester River his entire life. As I said, he monitors avidly Queen Anne's County development projects and attends government meetings for us at ShoreRivers, which is incredible. He also worked with our chair of the Riverkeeper Committee to organize our first ever Eastern Neck Island trash pickup last spring, which you can see the photos here of the group and how much trash we collected. As I said, surveying on Muddy Creek gives us a lot of information, and he's even been able to scout for us when we need to harvest grasses for our turbulator. And also, I had a lot of boat trouble last summer, which gave me significant boosts. And thanks to Bob, we were able to get out in August, and he really made our August water quality data possible. So thank you so much, Bob. This is where Bob lives. This is Long Point Community in Graysonville. And I'm sharing this because this is kind of how Bob and I got introduced. I don't know if Bob knows this, but I started work on January 13th, 2021. This is an email from January 6th. And Bob was so committed to protecting his community and the critical area nearby his community that he did not let the grass grow under a potential development project that was happening in his neighborhood. And he was really the first community member that I ever corresponded with. And he's been committed ever since to responding to particularly development in the critical area here in Kent Island and Graysonville. So much so that he's been incredibly successful. He rallied his community of Long Point, and together the community spoke out against an intense amount of impervious surface that would have been introduced to the area, so much so that Chesapeake Legal Alliance and Choose Clean Water Coalition published an article about him. So big stuff, yeah. Thank you, Bob. I think that I've learned a lot about being a riverkeeper from watching you advocate for Queen Anne's County and the health of the river. So I really appreciate all you've done. And I have an award for you if you want to come up, get your photo taken. So we all know now how much Bob treasures our waterway. And I know that you do too. That's why you're here tonight. Give me a clap if this is your first State of the Rivers. Oh my God! Awesome! Excellent. Did you just wander in from farmer's market? Okay. How about if this is your second? How about if it's your fifth? Anybody here more than 5? Yes, I'd love to hear this. to learn about the health and challenges of the Chester. Well, why? What is the driving reason that makes us care how it's doing? This resource is a backbone for our community. It is something that has inspired industry, art, culture, stories. How many of us can revisit a place on the Chester and feel like it's a scrapbook, taking us back to an experience we had maybe with our children, our grandchildren, our parents? And because this resource is so beautiful and has given so much, it has really inspired a lot of art. And so I'd like to share with you all a poem by Meredith Davies Hadaway. It's called Why the River. And she's obviously spent a lot of time thinking about what a river means to us all. Because it is a body. Because it rises in our sweat, marries our breath to the cold. Because it spills light back to us and hoards our shadows. Because it leaves when gravity insists, but always comes back. Because it traps the clouds so we can sail across both heaven and earth. Because it carries our tears, swells with our soul. Because it is a body. Because it bears our weight. And this is something that really spoke to me because this is a river that reflects the weight of human existence, right? Everything we do on our land impacts this body of water. And look at all of this. It obviously means so much to you. Look at all of these treasured areas on the waterway. We've got Chestertown, Reed Creek, the Corsica, Chestertown Marina, Graysonville, Langford Creek, Cackaway Island. So many of you are out on this river enjoying it every day. And that's why we're here. ShoreRivers has a mission to protect and restore Eastern Shore waterways, including the Chester River, through advocacy, restoration, education, and engagement. And all of that is grounded in science. And this is our team. We've got a community engagement team, education, development, riverkeepers, agriculture and restoration, operations and finance, and communications. More than 30 staff who are working for thriving rivers cherished by all Eastern Shore communities. And this is a joyful staff that shows up to work every day with a passion for cleaning up our waterways. And we have our Riverkeeper department, right? I'm not alone in this work. We have covered 4 major watersheds, and we have 4 Riverkeepers. Zach Kelleher here tonight. Yes, in the back on the tech. Thank you very much. Our Sassafras Riverkeeper. We've got Ben Ford in the back somewhere. And we've also got our Chop Tank Riverkeeper, Matt Pluta. But tonight you'll be hearing about the Bester River, the Chester. What is the land like around the Chester watershed? It's 50% agriculture. I think anyone who drives along our roads can see that that is our dominant land use, right? So there's a huge amount of land and opportunity and communities that we can partner with to make best decisions for our land use. We also have 10% forests. I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that Kent and Queen Anne's County that make up the entire Chester watershed are tied for the least treed counties in Maryland. So when we talk about natural resources that protect our waterway, we're at a deficit. I also want to point out that in Kent County, farmers implementing cover crops were leading all other counties in Maryland. So in terms of, yes, that does deserve some applause. Absolutely. And then I also want to point out that Queen Anne's County holds an MS4 permit. That means there's so much impervious surface in Queen Anne's County. I think we all know where that is particularly located. That means that they need to go above and beyond to treat the stormwater runoff that's coming from that area. These are all important things that are impacting the Chester River specifically. And what types of pollution are we dealing with? We're dealing with point source pollution, right? That's a pollution that you can point to. It's a wastewater discharge pipe. Here's Chestertown's wastewater treatment plant that discharges directly into Radcliffe Creek. We've got landfills, right? Anyone that's got a permit to discharge pollution into our environment, we can hold accountable with an important tool that's existed since 1972, and that's the Clean Water Act. Recently, the Supreme Court of the United States made a choice to weaken the federal protections within the Clean Water Act. That weakens the tools we have in our toolbox. But luckily, here in Maryland, 2 years ago, we worked with many different environmental coalitions to bring the Clean Water Justice Act,
which took the powers that we lost from the federal decision and restored it to the state of Maryland so that we had that power back. But much more largely looming on the Eastern Shore is our non-point source pollution, right? We've got stormwater runoff. The CESAR report from the Chesapeake Bay program claims that stormwater runoff is the fastest growing pollution source across our state. And then, of course, we have agriculture, which is the current dominating largest point source pollution. And then we have septic systems. How many of us are on septic systems? I know I am. This is something that we all have to deal with, right? And that all has a cumulative impact to our waterways. Regardless of what the pollution source is, it all comes with part of the territory. We're here in this watershed. We're here in the Chesapeake because we love to live here. But we all have jobs and we have houses, and we've got to build roads to connect us from our houses to our jobs. And all of those things have consequences when we manipulate the landscape. So how can we live our lives and do the good work of being enthusiasts and stewards of these waterways and start to lower some of these pollution sources, which are all being exacerbated by increased rainfall from climate change? And so ShoreRivers works to monitor these pollution sources through our tidal testing program. So I have 14 sites on the Chester River, from Crumpton all the way down to Rock Hall. We monitor those sites twice a month, April to October, and we follow rigid protocols from MTAC, Mid-Atlantic Tributary Assessment Coalition. And we share that data with government agencies to impact change for the better for our waterways. And we're monitoring for nitrogen, phosphorus, chlorophyll A, which is an indicator for algae in our waterways, temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and clarity. And while we follow those rigid MTAC protocols, this is community science. Anybody can do it, even Archie Richards, who's 7 now. And you'll find in your seats, you have your health grade report for the Chester, which is much like my high school transcript. And in fact, you'll see that the Chester's grade has stayed overall exactly the same as last year, 58%. But there's been a tremendous amount of change in the parameters that make up that average grade that I'm excited to get into with you all tonight. First of all, you can tell by this heat map, which is right, we're seeing the Bay Health Scale. Green is good, red is bad. We don't have any red on this screen, but you will see the larger our water to land ratio is, the green or the waterway, right? So when we go up creeks, when we go up into our thinner tributaries where we have a higher land to water ratio, then our water quality starts to become more impacted. And so to dig into the data that you find at the bottom of your sheet, you'll see that we have the Chester. When we say Chester, we mean the main stem of the Chester. And then we have tributaries listed: the Corsica River, Grazing Creek, Langford Creek, Southeast Creek, Swan Creek. And across the top, we have all of the different parameters that we're testing for. So when you see that Langford has a 62% in nitrogen, that means that out of all the times it was sampled, 62% of the time it met the minimum qualifying standards for acceptable water quality for that parameter. And so we do have a B- on our screen from Swan Creek down in Rock Hall, and then we have a lot of C's here. I want to just dig into the overall quality before we go into some parameters. When you look at this graph, you'll see the blue column is this year's water quality, overall water quality index. That's all the parameters. Gray is the 10-year average of the water quality that ShoreRivers has collected, and orange is last year's. So for the Chester overall main stem, we actually see no change from last year, but we see a 3% increase from the 10-year average. In the Corsica, we see a 17% improvement from last year to this year, which was really exciting to see, and a 6% improvement from the 10-year average. We love to see that score. Gray's Inn, we saw a 2% improvement from last year and the 10-year average. For Langford, a 13% improvement overall. So our tributaries that are dominated more from our own watershed have shown this improvement, which I think speaks to land use, and that's exciting. And we see a 3% improvement over the 10-year average. Southeast Creek, 8% improvement from last year. Nice work, Queen Anne's County. 6% improvement over the 10-year average. And Swan Creek is a new site for us in Rock Hall, so we don't have a 10-year average yet, but we saw a 3% improvement. So I do want to dig into two specific parameters that I follow probably more closely than any of the other parameters we track for, and that's phosphorus and clarity. If you've been to my State of the Rivers before, you've probably heard me say this, that phosphorus and clarity scores often correlate because phosphorus has to bond to sediment in order to move into our waterway. And phosphorus levels improved across the board in the Chester this year, which was really exciting to see. The Chester, overall 4% in the main stem. The Corsica, 24% improvement in phosphorus. Yes, Grazing Creek, 2%, not too shabby. Langford, 21%, good job. Southeast Creek, 16, and Swan, 16. These are the biggest increases, improvements, I should say, in phosphorus in the time that I've been here. So it's been exciting to observe that. And this is what it looks like on a heat map. This is just a way to view it in another way. This is a heat map showing you last year's phosphorus scores on the Chester. Boom, look at how much that improved. I love to see that. So as I said, clarity also improved. Not quite as much because it's not just sediment that goes into when water is clear or not, right? You still have floating plant particulates as well. But we did see an improvement in clarity across the board. 3% the Chester, 13% Corsica. We did not actually see an improvement in Grazing Creek. And then 23 in Southeast Creek, amazing. So we were really happy to see that. And again, we can watch this change from last year to this year. Love to see it. So something that I want to highlight for you all is how water chemistry can impact water quality. It was very exciting to see a 4% phosphorus improvement in the main stem of the Chester, and we saw 3% clarity improvement. That's great. But we saw a 4% decline in chlorophyll. If phosphorus and clarity are going up, why is chlorophyll going down? I think salt has a lot to do with it. So here are all of our testing sites on the main stem of the Chester. You have your sites there, and then you have the 2024 average salinity for each site. So up at Crumpton, CH6, 1.5 parts per thousand, all the way down to the mouth of the river, we've got 8.4. And then under that 2023 column, you can see the decrease, the percentage decrease in salinity for each of those sites from 2023 to 2024. That's a much fresher year for the Chester, which might be surprising to you all because I think we heard a lot on the news last year about what a drought we were experiencing. But our salinity measurements hold true, and we saw a big decrease. And so when we look at chlorophyll, and we look at 2023, and then we move to 2024, we didn't really see a significant change in our waterway. And that is because phosphorus becomes the limiting agent in fresher water environments. Nitrogen has much more of an impact on our waterways in saltier environments. And so when we see those fresher conditions, even though we saw that reduction in phosphorus, it was more impactful. So we spend all of this time and resources and staff time and power to monitor all of these different sites because we are committed to science, right? ShoreRivers has 67 tidal water quality monitoring stations, and we have 52 bacteria sites across our 4 major watersheds. That's in comparison to the state. MDE has 7 water quality stations across that same territory and 19 healthy beaches sites. And I don't say this to call out MDE or the state. I say this to show the power of grassroots community involvement. Yes, it's all of you that have been with us all the way back to the 1980s when CRA was first started to be invested to get real data in real time that gives us a seat at the table with decision makers, whether that's our commissioners, whether that's the governor. And so this really means a lot, not only to you all I know, but for us to be able to do our work. And it's not the only type of data we collect, right? I just shared that we have 52 bacteria sites, and that's a part of our Swimmable Shore Rivers program. And through Swimmable Shore Rivers, which promotes public access, public recreation, what are we doing this work for, right? We want to recreate in our waterways. And we monitor for bacteria. We track and monitor harmful algal blooms in our waterway. And we're just starting to learn and track how PFAS, the forever chemical, is entering our waterway and bioaccumulating in our fish. And then we also keep an eye on public access. How equitable is that public access? Is it for everyone? Through our bacteria monitoring program on the Chester, we monitor for fecal enterococci, And we monitor for this once a week, Memorial Day through Labor Day, that peak time when we're all recreating in our waterways. And we follow EPA safety thresholds when we say whether a site has passed or failed the safe swimming guidelines. And so you'll see we've got a lot of red in the Chester. You will notice that in Queen Anne's County, we've got Conquest Preserve and Corsica River Yacht Club that both have greens. So that's great. Good job. It's not a coincidence to me that these sites are on either side of a peninsula that is almost wholly enrolled in natural lands. So when we talk about the way we're using our land having a direct impact on our results, this is a great example. And here's just another way to look at this data, right? You can see which had pass rates, that were excellent and some not so good. Morgan Creek, Broadneck Landing, they've been low ranking for a couple of years now. In the second column, you can see the average failing CFU. And we can see over in the blue box that 104 is the standard. So if you have a sample that's 104 or higher, that's a failing sample. And we have some average fails that are in the thousands. So we got some work to do here for bacteria in the Chester. Something that really was different about this year's bacteria monitoring season is that we saw a lot of fails across the board, even when there wasn't rain. So ShoreRivers has often shared the message that when we have rain, that flushes bacteria that's accumulated on the land into our waterways. That's when we get our higher readings. But this summer in the Chester, I had quite a few readings you can see toward the end, in our hottest months, where I'd have 40% fails, up the last one of the year, a 75% fail with no rain. And that really stuck with me, and I needed to start to dig in to understand why that might be. And so first we need to understand what the common sources of bacteria are. So we've got agriculture, wildlife, and waterfowl, right? This bacteria occurs in every warm-blooded animal, right? So there are naturally occurring sources. Wastewater treatment plants, marinas and boating activity, improper discharge of waste from boats, right? Stormwater runoff, and failing septic systems. So when I look at our river, the Chester, there aren't a lot of point source pollutions that we can point to explain the bacteria numbers. But I did dig into what environments do bacteria like to grow and thrive in. And it's got to be dark. We've got a turbid river. It's got to be warm. We certainly know that our temperatures can go well above the 80s in the summertime. And it's got to be nutrient rich. Well, we've got all of those ingredients happening in the summertime. And so we could also see in situations where there is an acute pollution source, like a failing septic, or do we also see environments where a natural amount of bacteria is growing because of the conditions that exist in the river? In Langford Creek, we had a lot of community members that reached out with concern about how poorly that was performing. And in Langford Creek, we don't have any point source pollutions. There's no wastewater discharge happening. We've got septic systems and we've got marinas. And so we thought to ourselves, this could be human. And so we actually worked with a lab to take exploratory sucralose tests on our waterway. Sucralose is an artificial sweetener. Only humans ingest it, and our bodies don't process it. And what do you know? We did find sucralose in the waterway. However, sucralose can exist in the waterway for a long time. It's not that it dissipates rapidly. So it doesn't indicate how long that sucralose has been here. I'm sharing this as an example of the road to source tracking bacteria is long. And organizations like ShoreRivers are partnering with experts across UMCs and Johns Hopkins and many other nonprofits to better understand the protocols where we can get a handle on where these sources are coming from. I think that it's also an important lesson that we oftentimes think about our tidal monitoring and our bacteria monitoring as two different things, but it's one water. And so when we have nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment buildups in our waterway, we are fostering an environment in which bacteria can grow, in which algae can grow. And this impacts our ability to recreate on the rivers that we love. And we've got a lot of work to do because we know it's not just us recreating on these waters. We've got precious cargo that want to go swimming and fishing and build memories like we have. So what comes next? Here we are, it's 2025. The Chesapeake Bay program, funded by the EPA, has said that we were supposed to have cleaned up the Chesapeake Bay by this year. But unfortunately, we have fallen short of many of the outcomes that have been set out for us. The CSER report, which is a report released by the Chesapeake Bay Program's Science and Technical Advisory Committee, really offers us an opportunity to shift our focus from point source pollution to non-point source pollution, where we have the furthest to go. To shift solutions from voluntary programs and incentive-based programs to how can we create policy-driven behavior change that complements those incentive programs, maybe even drives participation. And how do we shift our priorities for what our restoration metrics are? So for the last 30 years, we've been looking at oxygen levels at the deepest part of the Chesapeake Bay. But we're not recreating there. I don't know if you guys have scuba tanks ready to go, but we're on the near shore. We're in shallow water, where we monitor at ShoreRivers. That's where our industry for fisheries is thriving. That's where our public access locations are. And CSER specifically calls out this near shore habitat as a place to focus our efforts moving forward for its potentially outsized role in bay restoration. And so what's near shore habitat? It's marshland, it's riparian buffers, it's submerged aquatic vegetation, it's oysters. But we have a lot of other land impacts that sometimes put nearshore habitat at risk, right? Clearing for review, clamming impacts to SAV habitat, an impervious surface for commerce, right? These are all things that we must balance, but have a real impact on the resources that probably stand to help our rivers the most. So we need tools to protect the nearshore habitat, and we have a lot of them. We have restoration and conservation. Luckily, we have an entire department at ShoreRivers who really excels at this. This is our most recent project map. I want to share that we have 392 projects across the Eastern Shore to improve water quality headed for our rivers, and that's amazing. Thank you, restoration team. Many of you are here tonight. So you all know 134 of those sites are here in the Chester, so we're doing really well to hold up our end. And those projects can range. They can range from working with our community restoration team to plant a single tree to green a neighborhood. Or it can also be as large as a wetland that spans across acres and acres of farmland. This one is treating farm runoff that's headed for Morgan Creek in Kent County. We also have shallow water restoration. Our restoration work isn't just on the land. We have Marylanders Grow Oysters, where we're planting oysters in 2 sanctuaries on the Chester every year, where our volunteers can grow these spat off of our dock until they're large enough to survive on their own and start to repopulate oyster sanctuaries. We also have an SAV program where we're able to work with our volunteers to identify thriving native beds and harvest grasses, where we can extract the seeds, which you just saw, and germinate them, and then plant them in areas of the river where historically SAV existed, and we're trying to repopulate those areas. And we know what a positive impact on water clarity and quality this SAV can have. When you glide in your kayak over a patch of SAV and watch the color change, it's really remarkable, and I know many of you have seen that. But we also have education and awareness. We have an education department that works with thousands of public school students every year, and we also provide older students with opportunities to take action. This is a picture from this year's Youth Environmental Action Summit at Chesapeake College, and I can tell you that despite conversations being had at the federal level, the #1 thing that our future students and our future innovators want to talk about is climate. And we're also talking about making connections for our students on why we need this precious habitat to support incredibly important species like sturgeon. We also have advocacy and policy. This is at the heart of what our riverkeepers are doing to improve use in the near shore, but we're not the only ones doing this important work, right? The state of Maryland has been a leader in creating policy tools to protect the nearshore environment. And in 1984, they created the Critical Area Commission to steward that very process. And tonight, I am thrilled that Eric Fisher, chair of the Critical Area Commission, has come to spend time with us and to talk about the Critical Area Commission's work. Eric was appointed to the Critical Area Commission in April 2023 after 16 years of policy and management at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And he began his career as a town planner with the city of Westminster, which is his hometown. When Eric isn't working to help the bays and our rivers, he can usually be found somewhere on them. And I do want to say that everyone remember how well the Corsica River did this year? Eric just moved to the Corsica. I mean, I'm not saying that they're related, but maybe he's saving it for us. I don't know. So please help me welcome to the stage Eric Fisher with Critical Area Commission.
Thank you, Annie. I'm going to check on the score before I show up next year, just in case things have gone backwards. But it is an honor to be here tonight. Greetings from the Moore Miller administration. Greetings from the Critical Area Commission, all 29 of us, and our 18 staff. Thrilled to be here. I have a bunch of things to tell you tonight, but the most important thing I have to say here, I'm going to say right at the outset, and that is thank you. Thank you to Isabel and Annie and the entire staff of Shore Rivers. Thank you to the membership of this organization. Thank you to all those of you who work every day, every week, every month in some way, shape, or form to get the results that we see and that we're all working towards. This is, yes, absolutely. This is where it starts. I mean, 300 restoration projects, 60 some monitoring sites. That is incredible capacity. That is infrastructure for restoration. That is infrastructure, frankly, for democracy. Yes, this is where it starts, and this is where it revives. So thank you all for the work that you do. They asked me to talk a little bit about what the Critical Area Commission does and what we're looking at going into the next few years in particular, because while we are a statewide commission, our focus really is on supporting local action. And we're going to talk a little bit about the tools that we have, the resources that we have, and the directions we're heading. So let's get right into that. I tend to wander, so I'm going to not wander.
And don't forget your clicker is right on
And
that stand if you need Eric.
Thank you, Annie.
Yep.
I was told I can't go backwards.
Do I need to go backwards?
Yes, please.
Okay.
This is a great way to keep me moving along.
Yeah.
I can't go backwards. Just a little bit about the commission itself. As Annie said, we started off in 1984. We were born out of the original Big Bay study from Senator Mathias and the EPA in the late 1970s. And then it was Governor Harry Hughes who picked up that report and said, we really need to do something about our nearshore habitats. So you know what? It all comes around again. We have 29 members from across the Tidewater portion of the state, supported by 17 staff. We have engagement both from the executive branch and from the legislative branch. We have an oversight committee from the legislature, and of course, we are administratively supported by DNR, and we get a lot of support from the governor. I want to make the point, though, that this is really a local commission. If you look at the membership, there's only 8 representatives from state entities. The rest of it is representatives from every county that has Tidewater in the state of Maryland. There we go. What is the critical area? Critical area is a beautiful 1,000-foot ribbon of land around all of the Tidewater in the state. So up close, it looks like what you see on the left there. That green shaded area is the critical area, and then the red piece is a special part of the critical area called the critical area buffer, and that is the first 100 feet. If you zoom out, it looks like this on the right, and everything in yellow is under the purview of the commission and our local government partners. What are we trying to accomplish here? Number one, minimize the impact of runoff on water quality. We knew back then, and we know now, that non-point source pollution, especially from development, is a major contributor to water quality or the lack thereof. And so that's where our focus squarely is. But we're also concerned about habitats, because we don't just want clean water, we want things living in the water. We want things living on the land. All those iconic species that we think of, as well as the foundational ones that feed them. We do need to accommodate growth. That's part of our goal. But we also need to pay attention to its adverse effects. So there's a balance there. Those first 3 goals have been in the critical area program for 41 years. Last year, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, the legislature gave us 2 more things to do. First is building resilience to coastal I don't have to tell many of you the kinds of impacts that we're seeing now from climate, but we are here now to address them. And 5, make sure we have open, transparent participation and an involved, robust public process so that we get fair outcomes from our decision making. Over the last 40 years, here's how we feel we've contributed to the effort, starting with the fact that it's a model state-local partnership. You know, we have our differences of opinion sometimes at different levels of government, but this commission has worked very well overall between the state and the locals, bringing the best that each has to offer to bay restoration. We've reviewed over 28,000 development projects, and I think we've made an impact on most of them. We have preserved a lot of contiguous forest, public access, and over 3,200 miles of protected shoreline and buffer. But we're not here to talk about the past. We're here to talk about the future. So the good doctor reminds us that the future is what we make it. Good one. Okay, we talked about the CSER report here a few minutes ago. I just wanted to show some of the linkages between CSER and what we're focusing on here at the critical area. And number 1 is that shallow water habitat. That basically defines what the critical area is. We have a focus on non-point source pollution, with Annie ran through the major sources of that. Habitat restoration, so we do get those species back. And a focus on phosphorus reduction, because it does bind to sediment, and that's a big piece of the development story. How do we do that? I'm not going to teach a class on the critical area tonight, but we have regulations that deal with all of these specific nearshore habitats and their issues. So whether it's anadromous fish habitats, or a steep slope, or a wetland, we're there. So where are we headed? I talked about those new goals. The first is dealing with the idea that our tides are getting higher. By the end of this century, we're looking at about an average, if you just take like the middle of the road projection, of about 3 feet of sea level rise. That is profoundly going to change our nearshore habitats in our critical area. It's also going to mean that in many cases, our marshes are going to want to move. They're going to want to migrate. And in some cases, that just happens naturally, but in many cases, you really have to be intentional about it, because it's easy to wall them off. It's easy to fill them in. So this is a topic that the legislature said, Critical Area Commission, you really need to focus on this. And so that's what we're starting to do. Intensifying storms, obviously coastal pressures, the wave action, but that also means increased rainfall. The critical area, our nearshore habitats, are sandwiched right in between rising seas and increasing amounts of runoff from the upland area. It's where it all kind of collides and combines. So we're trying to get our arms around that collision. And finally, our habitats. They're getting hotter, they're getting saltier. Who here has seen or knows what a ghost forest is? Yeah, that's a really hot topic right now. And what we can do to make sure that not only our wetlands can move, but our forests have places to go as the roots get drowned out. I'm not going to show too many numbers tonight, but this one from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science really brings the point home to me about the challenges that we're facing. So today, in terms of a minor flood, on average, a community might see a minor flood 2 to 5 times per year. But by 2050, which now is only 25 years away, we could be seeing as many as 50 minor floods per year in many places. A moderate flood that you might see once every 3 years, we now are going to see 5 times a year. And then the big ones, which nobody wants, we're going from once every 20 years to once every 3 years. This is a huge change in what the environment experiences on our coastlines, but also what our people experience on our coastlines. When we talk about sea level rise in Maryland, we often think about Dorchester County, we think about the lower shore, but the truth is that it has impacts all up and down both sides of our tidal waters in Maryland. Some of you who live around here might recognize this site. Anybody know where this is? Yep. So just down the road, Cross Island Trail right through the top here. This was a development proposal that came into the Critical Area Commission a year and a half ago for a storage facility. And when we got it in for review, they needed what's called a growth allocation, which is basically an upzoning. We looked at a number of different factors. One of the factors that was not in our purview was sea level rise. And if you put the sea level rise projections that I talked about a little bit ago on this map, you can see where we have a problem. If you add in, this is just like regular tide. If you add in the storm surge that you could expect from, I think purple is a category 2 hurricane, you're underwater at that point. And not just a little underwater, you're significantly underwater. These are the kinds of things the commission did not have the tools to deal with at the time the project came in, but we do have the tools to deal with them now. Enter House Bill 233 from 2024, so not this last legislative session, but the one before that. I know ShoreRivers testified in favor of this bill. We appreciate the support. We now must factor climate inequity into our decisions and help our town and county programs do the same thing. So thank you for your support of that legislation. Yeah, we need to do some things differently, and now we have the ability to do that. We're also updating our maps because it's changing. And I think we're back. We're trying to give a little bit more, frankly, flexibility in site design from time to time so that people can design around what we know is coming. And we're also looking for some ways to make sure that property owners maintain the equity that they have in their land. I'm not going to walk through all of this, but the point of this slide is to show you what our team and our commissioners are looking at, and it's pretty comprehensive. We're looking at growth patterns in general and how we decide to locate development and where we decide to locate development to begin with. I'm going to make a quick aside here and say one of the hardest things I think that we have to deal with at the commission is folks who hear about a development project at the very end of the process. Because frankly, by the time there's a site plan, many decisions have already been made. If you want to be effective in managing development in your community and get involved at the very beginning, at the comprehensive planning stage. That's where the rules are set. And we are looking at that stage to help us manage climate and be more equitable about what we're doing. But we're also looking at the site level. We're looking at mitigation, so where an impact is unavoidable. What can you do to offset your impact? That has typically been plant some trees in a field somewhere. But there's a lot more we could do with mitigation. And we're excited about the possibilities there, whether it's restoring oyster bars to clean up the waters, but also mitigate wave action as sea levels rise. That's just one example of the kinds of things that we're looking at going forward. And of course, public access. Because at the end of the day, why are we doing this? We're doing this because the environment has intrinsic value. And we're also doing this because the environment has value to people. How many of you love your river?
Woo!
Yeah, that's right. How many of you want to be able to touch your river?
Yeah.
Yes. That's what we're trying to do, to make sure everybody gets that opportunity. Just to drive the point home, this is exciting to me. I'm an urban planning geek. I've been an urban planning geek for my entire career. This is a site plan for the wharf at St. Michael's. And the coolest thing about this plan, and they did this on their own, is that blue line you see is not where the water is today. That blue line is where the water is going to be in 2075. So we are starting to see local jurisdictions actually taking advantage of the data that's out there and planning ahead. This is an exciting change, and it's the kind of thing that we are working towards as a commission to make standard up and down the bay. Just wanted to touch real briefly on access and fair outcomes in our decision making, because this is another issue that has been under-addressed for a long, long time. We want to make sure that people can participate. And that could be something as simple as scheduling a meeting at a different time of day to much deeper community engagement and making sure that communities that are not getting notice, that may not be able to understand the language that we're using, have ways to engage and make their values known. As I mentioned a little bit ago, we want to make sure we have access to water and habitats, so we're making that more prominent in our decision making about mitigation and site design. We want to make sure that people who own property have options to exercise the equity in their land. That doesn't have to mean build something huge. In many cases, it could mean transfer your development right to somewhere else where, given what we're seeing now, what we know now, it makes more sense. And then finally, making sure that every community, but especially those that have been underserved or overburdened, are not continually overburdened and underserved. Yeah.
That's right.
That's going to be a process, but it is a priority for us at this point.
And so that really aligns with a lot of our work that we're doing in the community engagement level, right? So I mentioned swimmable shore rivers, and part of that is to look at our public access sites. How do we advocate for better public access? How do we engage our community for opportunities to recreate in this water? We know that when you recreate with your environment, that fosters environmental stewardship, right? You can't love what you don't know. And this is a map of public access sites on the Chester River. So I know it's probably hard to see all of these icons. You might look at this map and say, look at all those public access sites. What's the problem? The problem is that if you don't own a car and you don't own your own boat, you're not recreating in the Chester River. Our public access sites are one-dimensional, and we need to make sure that there are a multitude of ways that our communities can access these rivers. Fishing piers, swimming beaches, walking and hiking trails. And we love to be able to see that incorporated into development proposals that are going to be serving the community in the critical area.
Okay, so how does this impact your weeknights, where you could be sitting at home doing nice things like reading books or trying a new recipe, or you could be out arguing about development proposals, right? Here's your opportunity to do that. Although we try not to argue, we try to have a dialogue, right? These are at least 4 areas where you can interface with the Critical Area Commission, sometimes directly with the State Commission, but frankly, most of the time, in your own county government. And the first, as I said earlier, so I'm not going to rehash, but I wanted to put it up at the top again. Comprehensive planning and zoning is where the die is cast. So find out where your county is in the process, and if you find it hard to figure that out, ask Annie. She'll know. Critical area policies, many of the policies that are in effect are the way they are because we have a state minimum standard. But many others is up to local discretion. So if you see a critical area bill come through Queen Anne's County, make yourself heard at that time. Same with alternative standards. A lot of the minimum requirements in state law say the following. They say, do this unless your county has adopted an equally protective alternative. So we try as a commission to make sure that those alternatives are, in fact, equally protective. But you know your county best. And it will be important for us to hear from you when one of these are coming through to make sure that we're doing right by our waterways. And then finally, of course, and many of you have experience with this one, we do see specific projects, especially those growth allocations, those upzonings at the commission. We want to hear from you about what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you know about how your river works and how your community works and what you need out of development. It'll help us make better decisions.
And Eric, I just need to take a minute to flex about my audience here tonight, because you are already a voice for the Chester. How many here participated in Queen Anne's County's comprehensive planning 2 years ago? 125 ShoreRivers members interacted with the comprehensive plan, so thank you for using your voice. How about Kent County? We had 450 ShoreRivers members exercise their voice during the comprehensive rezoning to speak specifically for increasing tree protections. And this year, we had members take more than 3,000 actions at the Maryland General Assembly to protect environmental funding for the Chesapeake Bay. Thank you all, you did that. Thank you.
Okay, so this is your reading material. This is our contact information. There's many ways to find us. Google's probably the easiest. But give us a call if you have a question, if you have an idea. We're here to serve you. We're here to serve your local governments. We also have some things that you can do, whether you want to get involved at the policy level You want BaySmart there on the left. These are all on our website. If you want to figure out what you can do on your own property to make it a little greener, a little better for the river, I know many of you are doing a lot already. We have the Green Book for the buffer. So that first 100 feet, what should you do with your first 100 feet of property if you're a waterfront property owner? The Green Book for the buffer can help you figure that out. This one right here, Native Plants for Wildlife Habitat and Conservation Landscape by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, is a fantastic encyclopedia of the kinds of plants that have been here forever. They know how to live here. You don't have to water them all the time in July and August. If you're looking for low maintenance and high impact, that's the document you want. And then Backyard Makeover, whether you're a waterfront property owner or not, there's a lot you can do to enhance habitat and improve water quality, and it's all in that resource as well. Yeah.
And you can also take action after you've done that light reading, right? For how many of us were new here tonight, if you're not signed up to get our newsletters, I urge you to stop by our table on the way out and get to know our volunteer programs, ways for you all to take action, right? You can be a tree steward with us. You can be an advocate in Annapolis or in your local commission's room. You can be an SAV watcher, a swim tester monitoring for bacteria in your waterways. You can grow oysters off your dock. You can support events where we get to spend time with each other and talk about how special these waterways are. I don't want to let the grass grow under this. You can take your phone out one more time tonight and scan this QR code, and you can take action today for the Chester. And I just want to thank you all for being here tonight, being with Shore Rivers. You all are why we do this work for the Chester, and I hope you go out and enjoy the rest of your evening, and I hope I see you out on the Chester real soon. Thank you all.